From the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., this is the Tyler's Place podcast, and I am your host, Maynard Edwards. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's get some things out of the way. You want to email us? podcast@scottishrite.org, or check your app store right now. We've got a whole bunch of free Scottish Rite apps. Most of them are brothers only. There is SR Chirp, which lets you connect with brothers from all over the country. There's also the Scottish Rite app, which allows you to connect with brothers all over the southern jurisdiction, but also for some of our brothers in the northern Masonic jurisdiction. And the SR Journal app, which you search for, and you can read the Scottish Rite Journal on your phone or tablet, no matter where you are. You can catch up with everything that's happening in the Scottish Rite Journal. All of those are available for free right now in your app store. Check them out. I do need to say happy holidays and thank you for another great year here joining me on the Tyler's Place podcast. The holiday season at the House of the Temple is fantastic. There's a lot of decorations, there's parties, there's celebrations all the time, and it's a time of year when our various team members who work in places other than here in the House of the Temple, you know, they might be spread out all over the country to help out with things. They come back and they hang out with us a little while, and we get to share some of the season with them. And one of those is Brother Chuck Morgan, who works in our development office. He's one of the development team members, and he usually works out on the road, but Chuck came back this year bearing a gift at Christmas time for all Scottish Rite Masons. And Brother Chuck, I guess appropriately we should say that this is a piece of military regalia.
I think that's a proper term. This came about really toward the end of September, first part of October. And to briefly state it, we were very lucky that the folks up in the northern jurisdiction contacted us and had received an advertisement for a presentation sword that was going to be put up for auction by the Cowan's Auction Company in Cincinnati, Ohio. And the folks up there in the northern jurisdiction thought that since it had a connexity to Albert Pike, that we might be interested in it. And the auction was held on October 31, and as good fortune would have it, we purchased the sword.
Now, the sword itself was a gift to
Pike.
Grand Commander Pike. So what can you tell us about the sword itself? Because it's a fairly interesting piece.
Oh, it is that. The sword itself is a presentation sword that was given to Pike by Benjamin French at a time when he was Grand Master of the D.C. Masonic Lodge. And he presented that to Pike. We believe that the sword was presented on August 16, 1861. Pike and Benjamin French had been friends before the Civil War. In fact, Benjamin French had actually put the Knights Templar degree on Pike, and turning that around, Pike had made French a 33rd degree Mason before the Civil War. Well, I think they were good friends, really. Right. And I have a copy of Benjamin French's diary, and there are numerous entries in that diary of contact with Pike and friendship with Pike. And so I think he presented this sword to Pike out of friendship and brotherly love as a member of Freemasonry, despite the fact that, of course, at the time it would have been presented in August of 1861, French was serving in the Lincoln administration as the superintendent of buildings here in Washington. Obviously, Albert Pike in Arkansas had by that time joined the Confederacy. Two brothers there on opposite sides of this conflict, but because of their Masonic association and Masonic brotherhood and friendship, you have one of them presenting a beautiful sword to the other one. Well, and we were very, very fortunate to have a group of Scottish Rite Masons in Louisiana, as well as the Louisiana Grand Lodge, who were willing to put up the funding to try and acquire the sword. Pike practiced law in New Orleans for probably 5 or 6 years in the late 1850s, even though he still maintained a residence in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so we felt like his connexity to Louisiana motivated us to want to get it.
Now, you yourself may have also practiced some law in Louisiana.
I did. I practiced law in Baton Rouge for 41 years before I retired in 2014 and came to work for the Scottish Rite.
Now, I happen to know of another gentleman whose office is directly above the one we're in right now, who also was a barrister in Louisiana, and that would be another Grand Commander.
That's true. I had the good fortune to practice law with Grand Commander Seal for 30 years before he took this job here at Scottish Rite, or was elevated to this job.
Well, I'll say I can hardly tell that you come from Louisiana. You sound like you just got off the boat from Great Britain or somewhere like that.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate
now,
that.
Now this is important, and I just want to remind you, it's just you and me talking, maybe a couple thousand Scottish Rite Masons listening, and that's it. What can you tell us about Grand Commander Seal that he doesn't want us to know?
Oh, my gracious. He and I actually became friends when we were 14 years old in Demolay.
Oh, wow.
So I've only known him for 57 years.
Well, that's all then.
And Brother Seal is a man of many facets. But I'll tell you one quick story.
Oh, yes.
And he may not be mad at me for telling this, but many years ago he had a sailboat. And it was a pretty 18-foot sailboat, and used to take it to lakes around Baton Rouge and sail. So one afternoon, he and I decided to leave the law office early and go take that boat out. And we went over to the boat was actually in his dad's garage, and Ronnie and I went over and hooked that boat up to his car, and I don't know why, but Brother Seal took out of that garage a little too fast, and we rode that boat right up on top of his daddy's Cadillac. And his daddy wasn't too happy about that.
I suspect there's a handful of us who may have put a few dings in our dad's car in our day, so we'll laugh, but only in solidarity.
Well, Ronnie's dad was one of the finest men you'd ever want to meet. And Mr. Seal told us, he said, I guess the worst problem with this is how we're going to explain this to the insurance company.
That is Brother Chuck Morgan sharing a great tale about Grand Commander Pike's sword, and also sharing a little tale, well, we'll keep it between us guys, about Grand Commander Seal's boat. So glad he could share that with us. Happy holidays, Brother Chuck. And thank you guys for listening to the Tyler's Place podcast. More to come. This is the Tyler's Place podcast, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards. This time of year, most of us get consumed with holiday shopping, and we find ourselves in one, if not several, retail giant stores. But one of the greatest retail giants in American history was actually a very active 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason. And joining us now to talk about Brother James Cash Penney, a.k.a. JC Penney, is Joan Gosnell, who is the archivist at Southern Methodist University, and she has been working for a number of years with the JC Penney papers. Joan, tell us a little bit about, the early times of Brother James Cash Penney, 33rd degree.
Well, Mr. Penney was born in Caldwell County, Missouri, in Hamilton, right near Hamilton, Missouri. He was born on September 16th, 1875. He actually was a junior, though he was never called junior. His father was James Cash Penney Sr. His father was a Primitive Baptist minister and farmer. The Primitive Baptists believed that ministers should neither be paid nor educated. And when Mr. Penney was 12, the elder Mr. Penney was kicked out of the church. The church offered to let his mother stay in the church, but she stood up proudly and said, "I believe as my husband does." This really affected Mr. Penney in that it took him a long time to join a church. Now, he believed in God and he was a solid Christian, but he was just really distrustful of churches and their politics.
Do we know how or why Brother Penney became a Freemason? What was it that called? I don't guess his dad was a Mason.
I know that he had two uncles that were Masons. One of them was Will Pardon, and Will was the secretary of the Hamilton body for many years. The interesting thing about Will Pardon is he actually ended up being in the Penney's company for a while. So I I think that had a very good influence on Mr. Penney because they actually worked together.
Okay, so we've got a family connection there, and that's certainly fairly common among Freemasons. Let's talk about his foray into becoming a retail giant. How did that begin? I mean, it sounds like he had some pretty humble beginnings.
Well, right after high school, his father, there were many children, and his father knew that they couldn't break up the farm too much, and nobody would, all the sons couldn't have enough land to farm on. So his father introduced him to the merchant in town named Mr. Hale, J.M. Hale, and he said, please hire my son, basically. And Mr. Penney was hired for the rest of the year for a very large sum of, I think, $2.71. At first, he was not a very good salesman, but finally he screwed up his courage and he started selling and really enjoying it. After a while, after working at the Hale store for a while, was diagnosed with what would now be was it pneumonia or tuberculosis? Well, he became ill, and the doctor said, you need to go west, young man, for the fresh air. And he moved to Colorado, Wyoming, and actually started a butcher shop. And the butcher shop failed because Mr. Penney, the first time the hotel business required that he be bribed with a bottle of whiskey, and Mr. Penney complied. And then the second week, when the hotel business came by again, he realized that he couldn't keep doing that because of how he was raised. His parents never drank, he never drank. It was just wrong. So he lost the business of the hotel, which was the biggest customer in town, so he had to find a job. He was hired on as a Christmas extra at the Golden Rule stores, which was a small chain in the West. And after Christmas, he had been doing so well that they hired him all full time. They said that he was ready to open a new store. And what would happen is that they would front him some money, but Mr. Penney had to front some money to open the store. They wanted to send him to a larger city. Mr. Penney said, no, I want to go to a really small town. Mr. Johnson and Mr. Callahan were willing to loan him the money, but he actually wrote back to Hamilton and he got a loan at a better deal. This first store, which became the JC Penney Company, on April 14th, 1902, the first day sales totaled $466.59.
Wow, that's not bad for a new store.
Which was pretty good. And he sold and sold and sold and sold. And he started finding, likewise, men that could run stores. A lot of them were first from Hamilton or they were family. And he expanded the stores fairly slowly. But by the 19-teens, it was large enough that it could be incorporated, and they changed the name to the Penney Company. The company grew the most during the 1920s, growing from about 200 stores at the beginning of the 20s to about 1,200 stores by the end of the 20s.
I understand that Brother Penney's first wife died at quite a young age, very early in their marriage.
Yes, they were living in Salt Lake City at that point. Mr. Penney was running about 10, 12 stores at that point. And it was right near Christmas, and Mr. Penney was traveling, visiting the stores, and Mrs. Penney had been so used to saving money that she walked home in the rain from an appointment, and she caught pneumonia and died. And wow. Mr. Penney was away. It was a really tragic death because they'd finally started making enough money that she could have taken, she could have taken a bus, taxi, she could have had a conveyance to take her home. But instead she was so used to being frugal. And they had also just planned for a big family trip to Europe. Mr. Penney still took the trip. He took his 2 sons as well as a pastor from the Salt Lake City Methodist Church, and continued. And then when they got back, he threw himself into his work. But he went to New York, and he was really down, as we would say now, but he was depressed, and he was ready to start drinking and just drown his sorrows. And he was in the Bowery, which is a bad part of New York at that point. And he heard his mother's favorite hymn coming out of, which was God Will Take Care of Me. And he decided to change his life and that he was okay. That's when he joined. He did a number of things, had more balance in his life, as well as joining Masonry.
After the untimely passing of his first wife, did he remarry?
The second wife, they were married and they had 1 son. She was a Christian Scientist, and when she took ill, she would not see a doctor. And she died, leaving behind a very, very young boy. The third wife lived. They had 2 daughters. She was younger.
Good thinking.
Than he was, and she outlasted him. She died after he passed on. And one of the daughters is still alive.
So this man, who had very little in the way of formal education, came from farm beginnings, from beginnings of a father who was a preacher, essentially. How did he continue to manage a company that swelled to the size that JC Penney swelled to? I mean, it was one of the largest retailers in the country for a very, very long time. So how did such a humble man manage such a massive, massive company?
Actually, in 1917, he gave up the full-time day-to-day running of the company and became the chairman. He felt that he was not enough of a risk taker, and that the company was growing so well that they needed somebody else to make those day-to-day risk-taking. And he oversaw the training of men. They called it man training back then because, of course, it was all men. But he got into that side of it and the recruiting side much more. And, of course, store visits where he could take the temperature, the pulse of the company. When the second president died in the 1950s, he became honorary. The second president was eventually named chairman in the late 40s, and Mr. Penney was named honorary chairman. When the chairman died, he was named chairman again, but he was not, yes, he attended the board meetings and was a part of the decision making, but his role really was we would call it now brand ambassador.
Understand.
Visiting stores, keeping the pulse of the company, making speeches in the towns.
That's Joan Gosnell. She is in charge of the James Cash Penney Collection, which is at Southern Methodist University. Brother Penney was raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason in Wasatch Lodge No. 1 in Utah. He became a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason in October of 1945. He was also a Shriner and a York Rite Mason, and Brother Penney died in New York in 1971. Our educational correspondent, Brother Mark Oldnow, 33rd degree from the Valley of Santa Fe, joins us now. We've been talking the last couple of episodes about the Sphinx, the riddle of the Sphinx, and what it teaches us as Scottish Rite Masons. And this month, Brother Mark continues that discussion and how it leads us into examinations of alchemy. Brother Mark.
I'd like to close up our conversation about the nature of the Sphinx by talking about how the Sphinx can be understood as a symbol of change, of the ability to transition and move yourself from one state to another. We've spoken about the Sphinx and dwelled on the traditional riddle of the Sphinx that we saw in Oedipus. The answer that Oedipus gave to the Sphinx about what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening is man. 4 legs crawling, 2 legs walking, and 3 legs, man on 2 legs with a cane in his old age. And what I'd like to offer to you all today is a different way to look at that riddle. So the traditional 4 elements of alchemy that are represented by the 4 powers of the Sphinx, of course, and again, just by way of review, are to know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. I want to read you a quote from a contemporary of Albert Pike's in the mid-1850s. It was a European by the name of Eliphas Levi. And Levi said, "To attain the sanctum regnum, in other words, knowledge and power of the Magi, there are 4 indispensable conditions: an intelligence illuminated by study, an intrepidity which nothing can check, a will which cannot be broken, and a prudence which nothing can corrupt and nothing intoxicate. To know, to dare, to will, to keep silence. Such are the 4 words of the Magus, inscribed upon the 4 symbolic forms of the Sphinx. These 4 powers, know, to will, to dare, to keep silent, can be ascribed to the 4 classical elements. Fire, to dare, ascribed to the tribe of Judah, and the figure of the lion, and the astrological sign of Leo. To know is ascribed to the element of air, the tribe of Reuben, the symbol of man, and the sign of Aquarius. The symbol for to keep silent, and the tribe of Dan, the eagle, and Scorpio. And last but not least, the earth corresponds to will, and Ephraim, the ox, and the sign of Taurus. So we have these 4 fixed elements, and we've talked a lot about how we seek to balance those elements within ourselves. If we look at the 4 classical elements that we just described under the powers of the Sphinx, and again, they're characterized by the signs Leo, fire, Aquarius of air, Scorpio and water, and Taurus and earth. These are called the fixed signs of the zodiac. They represent stability. They're characterized as the hayat, or the living creatures that Ezekiel describes in chapter 11. But there's also, within astrology, mutable elements or mutable signs. The adaptable signs are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. And then there's also the cardinal signs that correspond to Rajas or sulfur. These are Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. Part of what we do when we move from the 4 to the 3, and that the riddle of the Sphinx presents to us, is that it's not that we stay with the 4 fixed elements within ourselves. They're always present. But we bring this notion that we work with the characteristics or the virtues of adaptability, of stability, and of starting or beginning of initiation that's represented by the cardinal signs. So once again, in order to grow, in order to find ourselves and balance ourselves within the 4 elements, we have to have these energies, these powers that allow us to be able to move the elements around. There's times when we move them, there's times that we incubate them, and that we let them stay be. We allow them to mature and develop within ourselves. At that point, we're using the stable or the fixed notions of those elements. There's times that we change them, and we're developing the sattvas, or the mutable qualities, the mercurial qualities in us. And we're able to move from element to element. We're able to increase one and decrease the influence of another in response to various things that we may encounter in the world. And there's times that we have to start or begin something completely new in order to make a change, in order to balance those things within ourselves. So again, I just want to emphasize that this is not something that we generally come across readily in our studies. It is worth pausing and taking a look, do some research, do some meditation. Next month, in January, to start 2019, we're going to talk a little bit about the spirit of wonder. and I'm going to offer you just a couple of things that might be under your nose all the time, right in front of your face, that maybe you might want to pause and take a look at and experience the spirit of wonder for the new year. So, meanwhile, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays of all sorts and shapes and sizes and flavors for everybody, and we'll talk again in January.
Brother Mark Oldknow, 33rd degree from the Valley of Santa Fe. Happy holidays to you as well, my brother, and we will talk to you in 2019. If you've got a question for Brother Mark, he loves to answer questions. Podcast at scottishrite.org, and they'll get right to him. Normally at this time on the Tyler's Place podcast, we would delve into Tyler's Trivia. As you know, we wait until the very last minute to record Tyler's Trivia to give a chance for all of those answers to come in. However, sometimes this can bite us a little bit, as for instance, today here we are recording, and Brother Arturo de Hoyos is out sick, so he can't be with us to record. However, we will catch up with him and the answer to last month's question in 2019. So if you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it and do some research. If you haven't answered, you've still got time to get in on it in January. But we'll add a quick question right here and now because, hey, nobody's around to stop me, so I can do my own, and we'll do a bonus giveaway this month. And since Art is not here to give you guys a tricky question, I'm going to come up with a tricky one for the holidays. You heard me discussing Brother James Cash Penney, a.k.a. JC Penney, here on the show just a few moments ago. Brother Penney is a 33rd degree Mason, or I guess he's passed, so was a 33rd degree Mason, I should say. And when you become a 33rd degree Mason, and that happens here in Washington, D.C., you get to sign the Book of Gold, in which many, many other 33rd degree Scottish Rite Masons have signed, and their name goes in that special book, and it's placed in the archives. His name is signed on the same page, only 4 names away from a 33rd degree Mason who was also a United States president. Can you guess which president? Send your answer to podcast at scottishrite.org. Find me on SR Chirp or even the Scottish Rite Day app and get that answer into me. You should be able to find this one somewhere online. In the meantime, that is going to wrap it up for the December 2018 edition of the Tyler's Place podcast. Whatever you're celebrating this holiday season, I hope you and your family have had a blessed year, and I hope many blessings continue to follow you and all of our Scottish Rite brothers wheresoever dispersed into 2019. Happy holidays. We've got a special Christmas presentation coming up next week, so keep your ears peeled for that here on the Tyler's Place podcast. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards, and I'll catch you next time.
If you're interested in becoming a Freemason or in joining the Scottish Rite, email us at podcast@scottishrite.org.